Okay, so I watched you on your show and you guys talking about Juan Soto, and it was amazing because you do bring up the Blue Jays, right? And the things that you are hearing with that team and Juan Soto, but you even preface it with like multiple qualifiers of, hey, I'm not trying to get Blue Jays fans' hopes up. I'm not trying to tell them something to make them believe. Like, you get it. You clearly understand where this fan base is at right now, the frustrations that they've had with these free agents. But yeah, I guess fill us in on what the latest is that you are hearing with Soto and how involved the Blue Jays actually are.
Yeah, I think it all comes back to what ended up happening last year with all the reports about Shohei Ohtani and the Blue Jays, and I felt awful for Blue Jays fans in the moment because I tried to put myself in their shoes and how excited I'd be, and only to be how crushed I would be once those reports were denied and he ended up going to the Dodgers. And I try to be as careful about that as I possibly can. Mm-hmm. And this offseason, it kind of extends to the same thing. Is I anticipate them being a player for Juan Soto. They clearly want to compete this year. They love star players. They've chased them in the past. They've obviously come up a little bit empty. But I expect them to continue their efforts this offseason. And we already see that they're getting a meeting with Soto and his agent, Scott Boras, in California. Mm-hmm. And they're going to be in this thing. But so are a bunch of other teams. And there's teams with some really deep pockets that are considered the favorites as of this point. It's the New York Mets and the New York Yankees. And those two teams are incredibly motivated to get Soto. The Yankees, for obvious reasons, they gave up 5 players to get Soto. And the Mets, they want a star player, or another star player, I should say. They have an owner in Steve Cohen who has incredibly deep pocketbooks. And there's also going to be other teams that are going to be in this as well. So it's not like it's going to end up being a 1-horse race or a 2-horse race. There's going to be a bunch of teams involved in this. And yeah, like everything I've heard from teams that are going to be in the Soto sweepstakes or even outside the Soto sweepstakes is that the Blue Jays are going to end up being, they believe the Blue Jays are going to end up being a team that tries to be serious in this. And like, I respect that. I love that. But I think the realistic thought is that he probably ends up going elsewhere.
Yeah. I think everyone has accepted that here. And that's why it's not getting too much attention. And even the attention that it's getting is very much like the discussion we're having right now, where it's like there's an almost undercurrent of frustration with it, where you go, that's great. Like, just awesome that you're going to be serious about it, that you're going to bring him a lot of money. There's 2 thoughts I have off of it, though. One is, I understand having multiple bidders is better, and especially when you are trying to sign a record-breaking contract, right? Like, Boras wants one that isn't the Shohei Ohtani deferred money, but he wants to get close to, I would imagine, that Shohei Ohtani money. And some of the figures that have been thrown out there are, pretty astronomical. Like, whether it's going back to Eric Hosmer's tweets from during the playoffs to what some people are projecting right now. But if the Jays are getting a meeting and the Jays are getting this much of other teams talking about them, it would lead me to believe something that, I don't know. It's that one of these teams maybe isn't playing ball the way that Boras anticipated to start the offseason. Because to me, it's like, what, is it the Yankees that don't want to go up to a certain number? Is it Steve Cohen that we made assumptions about? Like, are one of those 2 teams right now, from what you've heard or what you've gathered, not quite entering it as seriously financially as maybe we would have expected? Like, is this a leverage play to try and get one of them more involved?
I mean, I think it's too early to say whether or not these teams are seriously involved financially. I think if you're getting a meeting, that means you're going to be seriously involved financially, because he's not going to end up taking all these meetings just to waste time. I think if you're getting in that door and you're meeting with Soto and you're meeting with Boras, you're prepared to make a significant offer. And to me, that's like, I respect that for the Jays, but I also think it's Boras trying to get as big of a, I guess it does come down to leverage when you look at it, is you want to have as many suitors involved, because you never know what they're going to end up offering. You're never going to you never know what they're going to end up pitching. And it all ends up playing into Boras's hand. The more suitors you have, the more the price is going to be driven up, especially when you have the Mets and the Yankees potentially competing against one another. That, to me, is why I think it's going to be really hard for one of these outside teams to really outbid either the Mets or the Yankees, because they have deeper pocketbooks than essentially anyone.
Yep.
And if either of them wants a player, I think they will go out and get them or get that player. But that being said, I wouldn't read too much into the early meetings quite yet. This is basically the field just getting set, and then they're going to meet with these teams, and then maybe they get dwindled down from there. Maybe there's more that get involved throughout the offseason, but I think this is just Boras trying to get a read of what this market is truly going to look like for Soto.
Yeah, which makes sense. And again, I'm not trying to. Actually, I'm not even saying I'm not trying to crush hope, because yes, I am. I'm absolutely trying to crush hope for the Jays fans. If he ends up signing there, that's fine. I'll eat this. I just don't even know what the Jays pitch is, because if you're trying to sell winning, well, the Mets and the Yankees are further along. If you're trying to sell resources, it's the Jays are not matched there. Yeah, they've got a great spring training facility. We already did that with Shohei. And then if you're talking about money at the end of the day, it's difficult for me to envision a scenario where the Blue Jays offer way more money than Steve Cohen. That ultimately at the end of this, that he doesn't just say, I will come over the top of any offer. Yeah, I guess, is that your read on it as well when it comes to the Cohen part of this? Because, yeah, it's hard. From everything that we've ever learned about this guy, like when the Jays beat him for George Springer, it was because they gave an extra year, and that's George Springer. Like with Juan Soto, I'm not sure what the breaking point is for a team when it comes to term or dollars for an organization like the Mets, for an owner like the Mets have.
No, totally. I think you're spot on with that. Is Cohen, if he wants a player, if he truly covets a player, he'll go out and get him no matter the cost. He's got a president of baseball operations in David Stearns, he's very calculated in the moves that he makes. So he'll be in Cohen's ear, but obviously Cohen is the owner of the Mets. Whatever he says goes. And if he wants Soto, and I believe there's every reason to believe that he wants Juan Soto, I would imagine he does everything it takes to get Soto. And clearly he loves playing in New York. He really thrived in the Bronx, and he clearly can play in that kind of spotlight there. And if you look at it for Soto as well, is he clearly wants to win. The Mets present an opportunity where he can get a lot of money, perhaps a record-breaking contract. They were on the verge of the World Series this year when everyone thought they were going to end up rebuilding or resetting. And then the Yankees obviously advanced to the World Series. They present a clear chance to win. If you look at the Blue Jays, last year was incredibly disappointing for them, and this year they held on to Vlad Jr. and Bo Bichette at the deadline last year because they want to compete in 2025. But they're free agents at the end of next year, and I think Soto could end up having some. I mean, this is just my own 2 cents, but if you look at it, he's going to want to be in a place where it's going to be a sustained winner. And when you have two of your best players set to hit free agency a year after, I think that could present an obstacle. That's just. I have no sources to suggest that, but that's just my own read from afar.
Hey, I think that's a pretty fair read. If you go, okay, I'm going to want to win, and you don't have any players tied to any contracts. And they would go, don't worry about that. We'll take care of that. You'd be like, take care of that, and then come back and talk to me then. Okay, so this is the more interesting part of the Soto Blue Jay stuff to me anyways, is what the fallout looks like, what the secondary plan looks like. Because I actually, I'm hard on the Blue Jays. I think it's been fair to be hard on the Blue Jays. The one thing that I gave them a little bit of reprieve on was the idea that they didn't really have a pivot last season, that it was, okay, they were all in on Shohei, and then they missed on Shohei, and they just didn't do anything else. It's like, yeah, the market was pretty limited. There wasn't a lot that was out there that I felt like, oh, wow, they could have gotten Cody Bellinger, right? And even at the time, I was going, all right, I guess go get Cody Bellinger. This season, to me, the free agents are more interesting. There's just different avenues that this team can take. And so I guess, what is your read as of today in terms of the level of attention that a guy like this gets and how it affects your ability to pivot? Because even if it isn't true, it's certainly something that was perceived. And you saw that with players in the Blue Jays clubhouse. Like Chris Bassett spoke on this and had to end up doing backtracking, but put it out there that it was players in that clubhouse that felt as though the Blue Jays did not pivot well after the Shohei sweepstakes.
Yeah, and I think that's spot on by you. Is last year it was really a top-heavy free agent market, and it was Shohei Ohtani or essentially bust.
Yeah.
And I mean, you could try to trade for Juan Soto last year, but obviously the Yankees ended up giving up a pretty huge haul for him. But this year there's a lot more options that they can consider, and if you want to look at another high-end option, I think you can end up looking at a guy like Alex Bregman, who could fill that third base spot really well. I think he would make a whole lot of sense. He could even be a more realistic option than Juan Soto. I don't know exactly the price that it will take to get a guy like Bregman. It will not be cheap, and the Astros are incredibly motivated to get a deal done with Bregman. Nothing is close, but they have made it clear that he is their number one priority in free agency. And if you want to look at some other options, I mean, you have Pete Alonso out there, you have Christian Walker. I mean, it could really kind of depend on how they want to divvy up Vlad Jr.'s time between DH and the corner infield positions there. So I think that one kind of is we'll wait and see on those kind of options. But if you also want to look at a potential like a DH only, like a slugger kind of guy, I think Jock Peterson can make a lot of sense. I know he's been a target of theirs in the past. Even Tyler O'Neill, who's from Canada, obviously has extensive ties to that area. I think he can make a lot of sense. Obviously, he's not Juan Soto. No one is Juan Soto besides Juan Soto. But there's options for the Blue Jays to get better, and I anticipate them doing that. They will get better. I'm just really curious to see exactly how they go about this. But there's more options for them to pursue, and I expect them to at least add one or two guys to the infield or just to the offense in general.
But again, this is what makes them a really compelling free agency team as of now. Is okay. So they clearly they're very unlikely to sign Juan Soto, who is obviously a massive problem solver for a lot of this team's woes. But they're meeting with reportedly just about every major free agent, or they're trying to get meetings with a lot of these guys. The weird part of it, though, is it doesn't seem, anyways, from a lot of the reporting, that the budget is going to materially change. That their ability to play checkbook baseball does not. They're not Steve Cohen here. Like, they're not just going to go out and go, all right, we're going to blow the budget completely out of the water from what it was a season ago. If you look at it, it basically seems as though they would have somewhere between $20 and $25 million to play with. And so that's not even one of these top-tier free agents. Like, if you're looking at the starting pitching market, that's not even that's certainly not two of these guys are being super into, like, the Bregmans of the world. So is your understanding of this, or your read on this, that the Blue Jays are shopping certain roster players, that they would be trying to move money out in order to create more flexibility to have some more guys come in?
I think if you end up looking at it, it would make sense for the Blue Jays to shop some of these guys. I can't say I've heard any names in particular, but I think shopping a guy like a George Springer, or even, if you want to maybe look at a Kevin Gausman type, maybe. But that's just my own speculation. The Blue Jays shut down the Gausman talk last year, I believe. We'll see if they end up changing their tune there. But I think a guy like a Juan Soto would be that. If you can make that happen, then you make it work, or you do everything you can to sign that player, and then you end up making it work, however that is. But to me, if it's really, it puzzles me when you think about this, because last year they made it clear at the deadline when they said that they were holding on to Vlad Jr. and Bo Bichette, is that they wanted to compete in 2025. Why wouldn't you invest significant dollars into this roster in 2025 to do everything you can to try to compete? I totally understand your frustration. I totally understand Blue Jays fans' frustration, because it would be maddening to me when you have your team say, well, we want to compete, but we're not going to be stretching the payroll by significant dollars. That to me, it doesn't add up. It doesn't make much sense. So I'm hoping they end up going out and they surprise a lot of people and they invest significant dollars into this roster. But based on that, I am not overly optimistic. I can understand. As I said, I can just understand the Blue Jays fans' frustration on this.
The way that it can make some sense to me is that they don't have a ton of money on the books the following season. Like, a lot of guys come off it, and again, they still do need to dole out contracts to Vlad Jr. They got to dole out a contract to Bo Bichette in order to, like, maintain this real competitive window, right? Because those things have to happen. But as of now, you could make the case, like, at least looking at it, like, okay, this money comes off, and so maybe you're getting ahead of it and saying, while the budget might be a bit bigger this year, it'll come down to sort of normal in the years following. So I don't know. That's potentially a way forward here. But the guy I can't get my eye off, like George Springer, to me, unless you tell me otherwise, has negative value. Like, I just can't imagine a team acquiring him and not telling the Blue Jays to pay for a bunch of the freight, which defeats the purpose of the move. Kevin Gausman, if they are trying to compete, like, they kind of need him to be a hit. The guy that I circled yesterday was potentially Chris Bassett, because he makes $21 million and he starts a lot of games. Like, he plays, he posts, as the baseball guys like to say. Would a guy like him have a market? Because again, it is $21 million, but it is a pending free agent. The numbers across the board have not been trending in the right direction, especially when you look at his age. It's hard to believe that it is going to get a lot better. But if the Jays did try to move that $21 million out, would he actually have a market?
I think you absolutely would have a market. He is a guy, I mean, obviously he's a very respected veteran pitcher. I know he's coming off of a year where I think his ERA was hovering around like 4.1. So he's still a useful player. To me, I think he would have a market. Maybe the Jays would have to send some money to whoever ends up acquiring Bassett. I mean, I wouldn't imagine they'd have to eat the whole contract, or they wouldn't have to eat much of the contract. They'd have to just send some money in order to facilitate the deal. But I think a guy like him with his pedigree, I think you absolutely would have a market. So I'm glad you ended up mentioning that name, because after I ended up mentioning Springer and Gosman, Bassett was the other name that ended up coming into my head immediately. And I think he would have a market. I don't know exactly how likely or how realistic the chances are that they end up trading him.
Yeah, I just when I look at, there's a lot of reporting right now that the Jays are looking at Max Fried in particular, that they've met with him, that they like him. There's even some smoke about Corbin Burns. And for the Jays, I don't know how much of this kind of stuff ends up being, well, a team is setting up a smokescreen or a team is doing their due diligence. But it's hard for me to envision that in an offseason where the Blue Jays are so desperate for bats and bullpen, despite the starting pitching being a bigger issue than I think it felt during the regular season, or it's felt in years prior, because it has been deep. It's like I think they finished 17th in, I just did this, so I'm going off memory, but I think they finished in 17th in Fangraphs WAR with starting pitching last year. There's some guys that are trending downwards. Getting a pitcher really makes sense. It just, for me, the money part of it feels like you got to make that secondary move. But yeah, what is your read right now in terms of how serious the Jays are when it comes to those guys in particular, like the actual starting pitching market?
I think they are serious about that. And if you can end up adding a guy like a Max Fried or any of these, or a Corbin Burns type, I think you absolutely need to make that happen. And again, I would imagine they're more realistic options than a guy like than a Juan Soto, because Soto, I had a couple of different president of baseball operations or even some general managers predict that Soto in the end will probably get about 13 to 14 years for about 41-ish million a year, which that is a lot of dough. And especially if you, as you said before, if the Blue Jays have 20 to 25 million to spend, that'd be really tough to kind of make happen there. So if you can stretch a payroll by a little bit, or even if you can trade one of those three guys that we just mentioned in order to end up signing a guy like a Max Fried or a Corbin Burns, I think you go out and do it, because Burns is he's proven it in Milwaukee, and he proved it in Baltimore that he is an elite pitcher, and he did it in the AL East. He's clearly familiar with that division now, and so you wouldn't have to do any projecting there whatsoever. Fried is still the same way. He thrived in Atlanta. He is a dominant left-handed arm, and if you have a chance to go out and get him, I think you go out and do it. And also going back to Bassett here too, is I think what really ends up playing, or what could play into the Blue Jays' favor, is he's signed for multiple years. He's not a free agent until 2026, and if you look at his last 4 years, he started 27, 30, 33, and 31 games. So he's clearly durable. I think, to me, that would intrigue a lot of teams, because what are all these teams looking for? They're looking for guys who can eat innings and be effective and try to take the load off the bullpen. And he's had an ERA that's hovered around 3 or 4 the last few seasons. I think, to me, that is a guy, if you can move him and you can sign one of these frontline starting pitchers, that to me makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. That's good. I like when my theories make sense.
You're a smart man.
Yeah,
you're a very smart man.
A lot of people say that. You know what the problem, though, is with trading a Chris Bassett, who is an innings eater and who you can rely on there to post and give you games, is that when you're a team that has no bullpen, guys like that are even more important. And as of right now, I could not tell you who the Blue Jays plan on throwing out there to close games, to set up games, to bridge game. Like, it's not good. The bullpen is in a complete state of disarray. I don't know how they even begin to fill it. I would imagine that a lot of it is going to be scrap heap guys. But yeah, there's a few dudes out there that are pretty interesting. Obviously, when from the free agent standpoint, you don't got to pay anything. But you mentioned a guy like Devin Williams and teams checking in. I guess do you think the Jays are one of those teams? And how active do you anticipate them being in terms of not just the bullpen, because they need to sign guys, but to bullpen arms that people will actually recognize the names of?
That, to me, is another really important part of this Blue Jays offseason. It sounds like we're we're talking about a complete overhaul of the roster here because we're talking about questions on offense, the starting pitching, and the bullpen.
But they're trying to compete. They're trying to win the World Series. Like, hey, listen, all they got to do is sign their two most important players, get another starting pitcher, get a bunch of bats that could actually provide home run power, and go from the bottom of the league, and also sign maybe 5 bullpen arms. But that's it. That's all we got to do.
Piece of cake. Yeah. That's all they need.
Easy peasy.
They need. But yeah, as easy as it gets. Oh my God, that's a very difficult job for that front office to try to navigate, and that's putting it lightly. And if you're looking at it, the Blue Jays also, they have to put a priority on this because high leverage arms are really important in this day and age. I don't necessarily know if they have checked in on Devin Williams. There have been teams that have checked in, and I think there is a realistic chance that he is traded this offseason because if you look at it, the Brewers have they've done this in years past. They traded Josh Hader when he had a year and a half left on his contract. They traded Corbin Burns when he had a year remaining on his deal, and now Williams is entering the final year of his contract. So this would absolutely fit their history. So I would imagine if the Blue Jays are looking for bullpen help, they have probably checked in on Devin Williams. I don't have any direct knowledge that they have indeed done that, but you would imagine there's going to be a lot of teams who are checking in on that, so it makes sense. But there's plenty of different options on that bullpen market that they can try to that they can explore, that they can check in on. But I don't believe anything is close, but I absolutely do envision them adding at least 1 to 2, if not more, arms to that bullpen this offseason.
How active is the trade market right now in terms of the conversations? Is this something where a lot of teams are holding up until the free agents start to move, or do you think that some teams are going to get like significant business done before the big names come off the board?
Yeah, it's funny because I asked this immediately after Jorge Soler was traded to the Angels because it was right after the World Series ended. I asked an executive, trades can be made already?
Yeah.
And he's like, bro, he was even shocked by that one too. And then I asked him, I was like, is this going to be an outlier or is this going to be like the new norm? And he thought it was going to be an outlier. And at the GM meetings when I was asking a bunch of different executives, it seemed like teams were trying to really just get those initial conversations started, and that was only about a week ago. So I'd imagine the trade market's still developing. Maybe we have a trade like peek through here in the not so distant future. I don't know, but I would expect the majority of the moves to not happen soon. I'd expect them to happen in the coming weeks and just kind of leading up into the winter meetings, and then after that, all hell could break loose. You never know. It could be pretty crazy.
Yeah. I just would think that, again, for a team like the Blue Jays, to focus in on them, if you are worried about the secondary plan, the pivot plan, if the Soto thing just so happens to fall through, if it just for some reason one of those other teams signs Soto, that, one of your ways of gaining potentially a competitive advantage would be to be active in the trade market or to jump ahead of things. Last year, they were a team that was pretty heavily linked to Willie Adames. A lot of people thought that the Jays really coveted him, and this has been a theme for them in the past like Kevin Gausman, for example, where they've really liked a guy, and then when they got their opportunity to get him, they went out and got him. And yet with Adames, it doesn't seem like he's anywhere on the radar, and part of that is like, okay, well, you have Bo Bichette, but Adames has put it out there that he is willing to move off of shortstop moving forward, and of course, why wouldn't you? You're trying to get a ton of money. You want as many suitors as possible. But what have you heard in terms of Adames and the Blue Jays? Because, again, to us, in terms of the secondary, just listening through insiders like you, there really hasn't been much.
No, I can say on my end that I have not heard any Adames and Blue Jays buzz. That doesn't mean they haven't checked in, but I have not heard that on my end. The teams that I've heard connected to Adames have been either the Dodgers, you look at the Mets. I think the Red Sox could make a lot of sense. I think the Braves make a lot of sense as well, although the Braves kind of have some questions with their payroll this year, so we'll see exactly how active they'll be in that market or if they'll even be in it at all. But Adames is going to end up, especially with him being willing to move off of the shortstop position, I think that's going to open up a different level of suitors for him, and he should sign a contract, I would say, for about $160 to $180 million, maybe a little bit more than that. So he is not going to be cheap at all. But the Blue Jays, to me, if you want to end up having a culture-setting player, you go out and get Willie Adames, because I was around him in Milwaukee when I was on the beat. and I also was around them during the postseason when they were in it. And the one thing that I kept hearing is how instrumental he was in that clubhouse. I heard it from players, I heard it from coaches, I heard it from the broadcasters, I heard it from the media members, is everyone loved Willie Adames. And Jackson Chourio, who is the Brewers' star player, he really struggled coming up in the majors right away. And Adames taught him how to be a pro. He took him under his wing, and Chourio immediately thrived. And he's going to have a very similar impact wherever he ends up going. And I would say, like, of all the players that I've been around in baseball, I would say Adames is probably the most respected one. And if you're the Blue Jays, I think you absolutely go and make that phone call and check in to see exactly what it'll take to acquire Adames.
Last one from me. So it seems, again, reading the tea leaves, that a lot of the assumptions that are being made about the Blue Jays right now are from other executives saying, well, this team is desperate. They're desperate to make a splash. They have to make something happen because, again, they missed out on last offseason. They wanted to make a splash, didn't happen. There's a lot of logical reasons looking at it from the outside to say, hey, this is a team that needs an injection of hope. And the easiest way to do it, especially given what they have in the cupboards, is to just, break the bank and go spend money on guys. But from what you've heard, is that any of that coming from like people around the Blue Jays, or is this solely something that is being talked about by other executives and other teams and other outsiders who are basically putting that on the organization, that pressure element, that desperation element?
I would say on my end, at least, I've heard it more from people outside the organization than people inside the organization. And the Blue Jays, they absolutely should be feeling the pressure because they have not been like they put a lot of pressure on themselves last year to go out and get Shohei Ohtani. They swung and missed, and last year was just an epic failure. Mm-hmm. And I think that's honestly a fair thing to say. They had very high hopes entering the year, and they crashed and burned. And they're going to try to run it back this year. They're going to try to end up upgrading a lot of different parts of the roster, as we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. And they should absolutely be feeling the pressure. I'm sure they do internally to go out and get reinforcements, especially since they've said that they want to compete in 2025. But most of that pressure, as I said, is that I've heard from has been from outside the organization rather than inside.
Robert, I really do always appreciate the time, man. Again, you can see his work on FanSided. You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram. Robert Murray and MLB Insider. Thanks for making time, dude.
Yeah, I appreciate you, man. I'll talk to you in a little bit.
Absolutely.